something we're always trying to figure out, especially in the United States, is protecting free speech, but also protecting our children. And one of the best ideas to do that is by empowering parents to have more decision-making about what their kids are seeing, viewing. I mean, we're talking about it in schools as well. We're joined right now by a great friend of our broadcast, great friend of the American Center for Law and Justice, one of our U.S. senators here in Tennessee, Senator Marsha Blackburn, who has got new legislation. It's bipartisan, which means that there could be real action on this, that we could actually get this to the president's desk. It's called the Kids Online Safety Act of 2023. Senator Blackburn, welcome to the broadcast, but tell our folks what this would do.
Yes, indeed. You know, one of the things that we have heard so much about is that there is not a toolbox, that there is not a responsibility or transparency or accountability on these tech companies to make their algorithms transparent to people so that parents can say, hey, we want to make certain that we put this content offline to our kids. And sometimes it's the kids that are saying, hey, we don't want this. We don't want to be exposed to this. So our legislation would put the burden on social media. It would establish a duty of care. It would require them to make those algorithms transparent, to open them up for third-party research. It would establish that there has to be accountability. And if you've got a parent or a kid that reports cyberbullying sites or things that promote self-harm or suicide or put teens in touch with drug dealers or pedophiles, that they are going to have to take a responsibility on that. They are going to have to get in there and take those sites down. And we give parents a dedicated channel, and we are certain that we have put in a timeline, kind of a shot clock, if you will, that these platforms are going to have to abide by.
I like that, Senator Blackburn, the shot clock analogy. And I think what's important is the tools being accessible. And that's part of this legislation, is that it's actually something parents, you don't have to be a tech expert to figure out, because that's what I think is, there's all these back end things you can do on your iPhone and your Android, but it's kind of back end and techie, and it's not necessarily just an easy, here, I want to check these boxes, and kind of what it says, mitigating, for instance, addictive features, which is the direct algorithm recommendations, that you could turn those off. But again, this would be up to the parents, would have to take the initial action, which I think is great. It's a parental rights and kind of empowering parents, but it also requires these companies to create tools that can actually be used.
That's exactly right. It requires them to build that toolbox and then to make that toolbox available to parents and kids. Because what parents will say is, we can't figure this out. There is a mom that, and by the way, this legislation it has 1/3 of the U.S. Senate already signed on as original co-sponsors. And you've got hundreds of groups, faith-based groups, religious organizations, pediatric groups, psychiatric groups, educational groups. All of them are endorsing this legislation, hundreds of groups. So we think that we can get this passed, that it will require that transparency and participation, because these websites, these platforms know what they're doing. They know that they are exposing our children to things in the virtual space that we would never in a million years allow them to be exposed to in the physical space.
What's interesting is someone who obviously has young kids and obviously has to monitor what they're watching. My wife and I always say that they're one step away, one click away from, you're ruining your childhood. Even on something like a YouTube on a platform. And problem is that some of these platforms have built kid features that don't work, as you said, or work improperly or don't work correctly. Ends up feeding them the wrong content, not the content that the kids want. So with this, you're able to actually, hopefully, really get down to it and provide something. And you have to have incentives from these companies. Because what you also have is that, say YouTube, for an example, you can't, if you click your content is for kids, you will natively get less money as a creator. So there's a lot of content that blurs the lines of, is this for kids or is it not for kids? What this hopefully does is also incentivize those people who want to make content that is wholesome and good for kids to be able to do that, because now they know with this, they'll be able to not only protect themselves, but protect their viewers. I think this is great.
That is exactly right. And what they have chosen to do is to blur that line, because when our children are on their website, they are the product. These kids are the product. They get data mined, they get tracked. That data is then packaged and it's sold to advertisers who are then feeding back to children more of what they're looking for. That is when eating disorders, illicit behavior, illegal activity, these are things that we specify in the legislation, because we know what is happening to children. We have a mental health crisis going on in this country. We have 1 in every 3 teenage girls who has contemplated suicide. And we know that much of this is driven by what they are seeing and hearing on social media. And this has gone on for too long. Social media has used our children as a cash cow, and it is time for it to come to an end.
Senator Blackburn, we appreciate you taking time to explain this legislation to our folks, and I think that everybody understands, especially that psychiatric level of this too. It's, one, losing your innocence, but two, also the idea that we know this is having negative effects on kids themselves. They're harming themselves or harming others as well in that process. And again, it's not about banning any of these platforms. It's about making sure that parents have the ability to keep bad content away from their minor children. So we encourage folks to support the Kids Online Safety Act of 2023, because I think, Logan Ward, this is key. Why Senator Blackburn, who I trust on these issues, wants to support the freedom of speech. We're not talking about adults here. What we're talking about is parents taking a proactive step, which in most cases they try to do. I mean, like it's pretty easy with the TV, but it gets harder is when you put YouTube on your TV and you walk away for 2 seconds. For 2 seconds. And my daughter has come to me a couple of times in even the ad for a movie that will come up in a very kid-friendly show on YouTube, and an ad for a movie that's too racy.
Well, it's like a weird law of where these channels, if it's kids' content, aren't tracking it. Therefore, sometimes you get served stuff that isn't even for children. It's a broken system we have to figure out, because everyone understands to use these services, there's going to be advertisements, and there's going to be different content.
Pay their bills.
But you have to figure out, and I want those creators.
They're not going away. The services, these are only going to get bigger, and your kids' ability to utilize them is already probably better than your ability.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's the thing. I mean, this can only go so far, but this is at least a big step in the right direction.
Well, I just need a toolbox I could use.
Yeah.
I mean, I think that would be the biggest part for this. An easy toolbox that I can utilize, and then then it opens up, like you said, these apps to younger audience intentionally. But you as a parent have a lot more trust. It's not going to be perfect right off the bat, but it's something we've got to work towards.